I was very pleased to see Jason Springs again. He was a student in my 2007 microeconomics class. He's an exception to the general tendency I'm going to describe today, which is that most people don't think that luck had anything at all to do with their success. They think they did it all by themselves. He very modestly called himself lucky to get into Cornell. I have my laptop with me, so I snuck it out while he was talking and looked up how he did in my course in 2007. And he did really, really well. He got one of the few perfect scores on my final exam. I will always put a killer difficult question on there. And so E.B. White wrote these words in an essay published in the 1930s. I thought I could use them for free in my book. I was surprised, therefore, when I learned that I had to pay $500 to use them, but it seemed worth it since it so closely tracked the main idea I wanted to get across, which is that people just don't recognize the role that chance plays in their lives. If it's obvious, then they see it. So if you win the lottery, no problem. That person was lucky, although lottery winners often there too try to claim that they had some sort of insight that enabled them to pick the winning number. Mostly people recognize luck here. If you have bad luck in an obvious way, you recognize that. The guy in the bow tie up in the inset, that's Mike Edwards. He was the cellist in the group that became the Electric Light Orchestra. He was driving along on a rural highway in England. A 1,300-pound bale of hay broke its tether on the mountainside, started rolling down, gathering speed. It hit a berm, jumped a very high fence, landed right on top of his truck, and killed him instantly. It's bad luck. You know, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nobody had anything bad to say about him. He didn't deserve that fate. It just happened. But most of the time, that's not how chance events affect our lives. Every career has probably thousands of different steps. Many of them hinge critically on how much talent we have, how hard we work. We remember those keenly. But then once in a while, there's a little random thing. Maybe you had a teacher in the 11th grade who kept you out of trouble, or maybe you got a promotion early on in your career because a colleague who was a little bit more qualified than you were couldn't accept it. He had to care for an ailing parent. Those things you tend to lose sight of. Then 30 years on, you're a big success. Why did you succeed? It's obvious. I worked hard and I was talented. Your memory bank is full of supporting evidence for that. The little lucky breaks that change the course of your path just by a degree or two accumulate over time and can have a huge impact on the final outcome. This is Paul Lazarsfeld, a sociologist who coined the term hindsight bias. We see an event, we think it was way more predictable than in fact it was. You can always invent a narrative that makes the thing that happened seem like it had to have happened. The way he illustrated the idea was to tell subjects in an experiment that a study had been done. Its aim was to figure out whether it was men who had grown up on farms, or was it men who had grown up in cities, which group was better able to adjust to the rigors of military life. He told them that the finding of the study was that the farm boys adjusted more readily. And the subjects' reactions were exactly as he suspected they would be. Isn't that obvious? Why would anyone need to do a study to find that out? And of course, the twist was that the finding of the actual study was that the boys who'd grown up in cities were much better able to adjust to the rigors of military life. You see the outcome, you think you can explain it, you could come up with a plausible narrative for either one of those outcomes. Our memory is selective. This set of ideas I owe to my friend and co-author, Tom Gilovich, a psychologist at Cornell. Do a Google search on the term headwinds. And then hit the image link. You'll get all sorts of vivid images that capture the idea almost perfectly. Then do a Google search on tailwinds. And look at the images that come up there. gobbledygook. There's no succinct way to portray the concept of tailwinds that matches what can be done so easily with headwinds. And as in visual representation, it's the same in trying to think about these two concepts psychologically. So Gilovich says, imagine a time when you were riding your bike into a stiff wind. You were aware of the handicap you faced every meter you rode forward into it. It was on your mind, you were battling it. Then the course turns around and you've got the wind at your back. How does that feel? Well, it feels terrific for a couple of seconds. And then it completely drops from your mind that you're operating with the assistance of a tailwind. So when we think about our careers, how did we do? Well, we fought all these obstacles. Those are very easily retrievable in memory, but the things that were pushing us along, not so much. You played Scrabble. What kind of letters did you get? Oh, I had 4 I's and not a single vowel worth more than a point. What about your partner or your opponent? You had a J, an X, a Z, you had all the good letters. Well, of course, the number of good letters evens out when you play any number of times, yet people's memories of who had what are very tilted in the opposite direction. You see vivid examples in the labor market, in the arts, and other spheres. I had an argument with my editor. I wanted to call Breaking Bad the best television drama series of all time. He said no. We ended up compromising. It's one of the best drama series of all time. Okay. How did it get to be the best? Vince Gilligan, the producer of it, wanted to cast Bryan Cranston in the Walter White role. The studio bosses, since they were going to spend a lot of money on this production, didn't want him because here he was in his 50s, never had a leading dramatic role in his career. They wanted them to cast somebody who would bring people into the show by virtue of having a broader reputation. The first person they insisted that the offer go out was Matthew Broderick. I can't imagine Matthew Broderick as Walter White, but he said no. I bet he's wondering about the wisdom of that decision in the interim. Then they offered it to John Cusack. Cusack said no. Finally, Gilligan was able to persuade them to offer it to Bryan Cranston, and the rest is history. He won 4 Emmys during the show's 5 seasons. He's the most sought-after actor in his slice of the demographic. But except for a lucky break here, I never would have heard of him. Some of you would have known that he had played the dad in Malcolm in the Middle. I didn't know that. But you would not know him as the powerhouse actor that he's become. That doesn't mean he doesn't deserve praise as a talented actor. I've seen him do things that I can't believe an actor can do. He really is one of the best actors out there. But the point is, there are many, many actors who we have never heard of who are probably just as good. They just didn't get their break when the time came. Everyone in my part of the age distribution recognizes the woman in the upper left. Most of you will recognize both faces. The one in the lower right is, of course, Kim Kardashian. I'm going to take it as a working hypothesis that culture observers who say she's done nothing in particular to command anything like the amount of attention that she commands from us is an accurate statement. What has she done? She is famous for being famous, is how it's often summarized. We're interested in her just because she has somehow become so prominent. The same appears to be true of the Mona Lisa. Thousands of papers have been written about that painting, celebrating why it's such a revere, why it's become the symbol of Western art and culture. But is it really such a wonderful painting? When I first saw it, it didn't impress me. It's very small. You have to elbow 300 people aside to get anywhere close to it. In an adjacent gallery, there are 2 other Leonardos. Nobody's crowding anybody aside to see them. They have the same brushstrokes. They're from the same period. Why doesn't anybody care about them? Well, Duncan Watts, the sociologist we just heard the quote from, had the same reaction I did when he first saw it, and so he did a little digging. And it turned out that nobody much had remarked about the Mona Lisa in the first couple hundred years of her life. Then, in 1911, Vincenzo Peruggia, a custodian at the Louvre, stole the painting. He put it under his cloak one night and walked out with it. That happened to be just at the time when newspapers could, for the very first time ever, reproduce images on their pages. And so all around the world, there was an explosion of news coverage talking about the theft of the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa's image was on every newspaper. It was unsolved for 2 years. Then finally, Perugia tried to repatriate the painting to Italy, where he thought it belonged. He tried to sell it to the director of the Uffizi, who of course turned him in. Another explosion of publicity, Mona Lisa pictures all over the world. And ever since then, it's been the most famous and revered painting ever. But why is it famous? Watt says, art critics say it's famous because it has qualities X, Y, and Z, but if you look carefully, what they really say is that it's famous because it looks more like the Mona Lisa than any other painting. It's famous, in all likelihood, just because it's famous. Phil Cook and I wrote a book in 1995 in which we argued that chance events have always been important, but are becoming much more important. That's because technology now enables the person who's best at what she does to serve the whole market. That's an exaggeration in some cases, but to expand her reach. We once needed 4,000 sopranos to serve the world market. There weren't enough sopranos so everybody could hear the best, and we needed a deep lineup so people could hear some soprano. And the 6,000th best one was awfully good, maybe even not so noticeably much less talented than the best one. Now people listen to music in recorded form. All we need is the best soprano. Once the recording's made, we stamp out copies of it. She earns a 7 or 8 or 9 figure salary each year. The second best, whom many would have a difficult time identifying as being any less talented from behind a curtain, that person ends up teaching music lessons to 3rd graders in New Jersey at a modest salary. And when you have markets like these, what's become the norm is for thousands, tens of thousands, maybe many more contestants to flood into the market to compete to see who can be anointed as best. And we've done some simulations with markets like these. In one, we let it be a pure horse race. The fastest runner wins. Speed depends on talent and effort. 98% of your speed is determined by those. You draw your talent and effort out of an urn that has numbers from 0 to 100. And it depends 2% on luck. To win that contest, obviously talent and effort are the most important factors. You've got to be talented and work hard. Almost all successful people are talented and they work very hard. But if you're not also lucky, you're probably not going to win. So in one set of runs, the most frequent luck score of the winning contestant was between 95 and 100 on the 100-point scale. What that means is that if you look only at the most talented contestant in a really big pool on the 100-point scale, that person's going to have an expected talent level of 99.9. But if talent counts for only 98%, well, there goes two points off of the perfect score. That person's going to have only an average luck score. We selected the person because of her talent, not because of she was lucky. There will be many, many other people who are almost as talented as she is. They've got 99.85, and some of them, not most of them, but some of them will also have been very, very lucky. If you're not lucky, you're probably not going to be among the winners of these contests. So 22% of the people here in this particular simulation were the most talented contestant. The winners in almost more than three-quarters of the cases were not the most talented contestant. So luck's important. It's been growing more important. Why is that a problem? I'm going to describe quickly an experiment that we ran that gets at the main idea. As background, I'll say that if you think you did it all yourself, there's evidence for this proposition too. If you think you did it all yourself, you have a much stronger sense of entitlement to whatever the pay was for what you did. You don't want to give any of it back. And so I think if you'll think about the trend in tax rates in the developed countries over the last decades, they've been trending downward. Much of that has been because more and more of the incomes are generated in these kinds of markets. The people who win in these markets are very talented, they work very hard, and because they feel entitled to keep everything that came their way, they're able to lobby effectively for reductions in their tax rates. One consequence has been that we're not able to make investments in the institutional structure that enable those people to succeed in the first place. You know, the educational investments, the roads, the infrastructure that lets a business succeed. So in this experiment, people were asked to name something good that had happened to them. And one group was asked only that. A second group was asked to list 3 things that they personally had done to make the good thing happen or to contribute to it. And then a final group was asked to list 3 things external to themselves, other factors that had made it happen. And at the end, they were given an opportunity to give some or all of the bonus for participating in the experiment to a charity of their choosing. And what we found was that the people who were asked to name external causes gave about 25% more to charity than the people who were asked to list things they had done. And the control group was roughly in the middle. And more generally, there's a very large literature that suggests that if you will prime people to recognize that they've been fortunate in part to enjoy whatever good outcomes they've had, they become happier, they become more generous to others, more willing to pay forward for the common good, and other people like them more. Did anyone think less of Jason when he said, falsely I believe, that he wasn't that smart, he was lucky to get into Cornell? That's a trait that we like in people. When you'd rather hire a guy like with that attitude than somebody who said, yeah, I deserved every little bit that came my way. So how can we get people to reflect more on the fact that they were fortunate? Telling them that they've been lucky is an ineffective strategy. Barack Obama tried that in 2012. He gave what came to be known as the "you didn't build that" speech. Oh, you built a business? Well, you didn't build that. He, of course, went on to say that the community helped you build it. They invested in the infrastructure that enabled your business to succeed. If you read the transcript of the speech, you would find nothing in it that any reasonable person would say, oh, no, that's not right. It was a totally reasonable set of remarks that he made. But that speech went viral immediately and generated millions of outraged comments. People heard him say, oh, you're successful. Well, you don't deserve to be. Or you have a lofty position. You're a fraud. That wasn't the message of that speech. How can we get people to think about the fact that they've been lucky if they've managed to succeed on a grand scale, which is almost always the case? I've just stumbled upon a method that seems to work. Don't tell people that they've been lucky. Ask them to describe for you any experiences exhibiting good fortune that they may have had along their path to the top. If you ask them that, they don't get angry, they don't get defensive when they hear that question. On the contrary, they seem to enjoy thinking about the assignment you've just given them. Their minds process it. You can just tell the moment they think of an example of when they were lucky, they want to tell you about it. They do tell you about it, and that kindles a memory of a second example. They tell you about that too. And then before long, they're describing investments we ought to be making more of to help push society along. So I will say, just as a plea going forward, if you have successful friends, I know almost everyone here does, ask them to tell you about any episodes of good fortune they may have enjoyed. Maybe they won't end up proposing a list of public investments that we ought to be doing more of, but at the very least, you'll hear some very interesting stories. I've been doing this for quite a while now, and it's been enormous good fun. The gratitude literature is very clear on this. It's a magic elixir. The more you experience it, the more you have of all the good things that people seem to care about. So thanks for inviting me to come. I'm honored to get a chance to speak to you, and good luck to everybody in your own ventures. I hope you succeed.